Madame.
And they must have thousands.
No, you didn't show me. I like.
For the benefits of the LDCs, and the presenter is Professor Nurhuda, very conveniently, I can introduce him through what you can see there on your left. Former director of Bangla Academy, I will also add the director of the Nozul Academy, and might be a consultant, and he continues to teach, and is also an eminent poet. The next paper is, which I really look forward to listening to, and the paper is going to be presented by Dr. William Westerman. Dr. William Westerman teaches in the Master's Program in Cultural Sustainability at Goucher College, and he has also taught at Princeton and the University of Pennsylvania. And then we have two other papers, both from faculty members of Russia University. First of these two are The Effects of Globalization on Bangladesh Folklore, Two Contexts, by Professor Saifuddin Chaudhry of the Department of Folklore, Russia University. And discussant, one more paper I think, and the discussant of the session is also from Russia University, Dr. Mustafa Tariqul Islam, and not discussant, another paper, Folklore Research in Bangladesh in the Global Context. So we all look forward to this session, and I'd like to invite all the session chair and the paper presenters, and I will abdicate at this point.
And I also again want to thank our hosts for what's turning out to be, I think, a wonderful meeting, very interesting, well attended. So we do appreciate all the effort that's gone into making this into such a successful event. Can you hear me all right? Do people need to shout? It sounds loud to me. Okay. Well, we've already had an excellent schematic introduction on protection, promotion, and development of folklore for the benefit of less developed countries. I should say, while we have a moment, there's one administrative point here, and that's that we have 4 papers, so we're going to try to keep within our 20-minute time slots so that we have...
This is the exact title of my, presentation, though the TK and TCs have been branded under the same word, folklore, because the expressions of folklore also mean TK and TCs. This is we can say a summary of what I worked on: identification, valuation, and intellectual property protection of Bangladesh, of traditional cultural expressions of Bangladesh. And most of the people who worked with me from Bangladesh, they are present here, including I remember Muhammad Nurul Islam, and also Mahfuzur Rahman from, he is from Moulabibazar. So here, Bangladesh is a least developed country, and the survey was done on Bangladesh, a least developed country, and the findings, we believe that it will be clearly applicable to other LDCs. That's why folklore, this finding is beneficial for the globe as a whole. Within the broad spectrum of building capacity, next slide please, a knowledge base for wealth creation, social and cultural development of least developed countries, outlined as promotion, protection and development of traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions to least explored fountains of human creativity worthy of being converted into decisive tools for utilitarian purpose of humankind as a whole. We cannot forget the reality that since time immemorial, traditional societies at different parts of the world have been growing and evolving over the banks of human civilization, rendering the knowledge into both physical and metaphysical expressions. It is because of the symmetrical traditional, their spontaneous exuberance are also to be noted carefully. However, the ultimate target is undoubtedly the collective welfare of all concerned, not excluding the least privileged people of the world. Next. We are tempted to argue that, next slide please, we are tempted to argue that both TK and TCs are indissolubly linked to each other since the very expressions originate. And the expressions are the children of TK. That's why TK and TCs are maybe compared as mother and children placed in the world. Today there are 48 or 47 least developed countries in the world, but when I did this, survey, I found there are 50s. By within 3 or 4 years, only 3 have matured or they have graduated area, or below, if you want to be enrolled as a LDC. Then there is a human resource, criteria. These are called. And then there is an economic vulnerability criteria involving a composite economic vulnerability. In terms of agricultural production, the instability of exports of goods and services, the economic importance of knowledge. A country must satisfy all 3 criteria. To qualify for graduation, a country must meet the certificate criteria reviewed by the CDP. In addition, since the recognition of structural handicaps excludes lots of the world, of which only, so far I know, 3 have graduated. So we presume that it may take ages together for graduating from the list of LDCs. If so far 2 countries are one from, Africa, and another 2, it's quite clear that the LDCs are caught in a vicious circle, which may require these countries ages together to graduate from the list. I think it is false, but the process will help them to stand on their own strength. Not the landed knowledge, as we argued in the first day. It is the scientific knowledge. It means TK should come within the purview of the new knowledge. It may be scientific knowledge of in the evolved in changed society. So in some countries, SK seems to pose serious threats to TK, but in most cases TK is still playing the pivotal role in their production and creative system, especially the agricultural countries and other countries which are not industrially very developed. The initiation of the educated, getting Western education in the main society into modernized worldview and liberated outlook have also guided them to look back into their old roots with wonder and admiration. We remember that the Britishers who rather encouraged us to look back into our own roots. The first folkloric survey was done by the Britishers. We know who is the pioneer. They are now poised to rediscover and globalized. This is how they are earning revenue for Bangladesh. These similar things may earn revenue for other LDCs countries. Next, please. Not isolation, but respectable interaction. Fieldwork survey into existing social structure and daily life of the communities will give surprising results relating to poverty alleviation and wealth creation needed for graduation of the country from the list of LDCs. This is the last paragraph of my slide. I did not read out the earlier ones. We here argue that not isolation. A country must not isolate itself from what the international community for the sake of just folklore, the traditional knowledge. They must add themselves with others. Please next. So first they will have to make an evaluation, commercial evaluation of the commercially viable TCEs. Here is a chart. I can't just elaborate it. You will find that summary of evaluation of TCEs of Bangladesh 2007. The conceptual valuation was perhaps it is 2.4 or 2 billion, and the tentative valuation was more than 3 billion. Next. And in so doing, what we need a valuation theory. Please next. A valuation theory, every item you have to survey, find out, you have to identify, and after that you have to find out the value at local level, at country level. And we call it CCTV. CCTV means country. Country was traditional, tentative, traditional, cultural valuation. If with these Bangladesh is earning as a traditional, on the sector of traditional cultural expressions. Please, next. Promotion includes awareness raising, identification, valuation of TK and TCs in the main. I have already said something about this. If you want to promote the TKs, what you will have to say? You have to retain its not originality, uniqueness, form, integrity of a culture, and then you have to evaluate it, make valuation of cultural aesthetic valuation. You can do it easily after consulting the experts. But for our experience is that if you go to an indigenous community, you can ask for something. What is the valuation of this? Say Wakshuk Saka or Nukshikata from some parts of North Bengal. That with a clear concept and clearly clarify it to the community. You have to say that if you give this information, it will be evaluated. Outsider should work as catalyst. We will go there, we will say, we will get anything traditionally important, almost endangered and extinct. These are the 5 categories, and you will find a lot of things. And there are some almost dying out. A lot of varieties are there. You will have to revitalize them. And you, like as I said yesterday, Hukmarga. So the list of going through a questionnaire by which you can collect information for all kind of valuation, including valuation in the field of economy, in the field of literary, in the field of aesthetic. Next. Protection. You have to protect. Protection is a sustainable instrument, building promotion and development. Protection can be interpreted with both a narrow outlook of conservatism and a wider one in which protection may be looked upon as a sustainable instrument, bringing promotion and development. We emphasize on the wider outlook so that a protected item does not limit its utility and usability within a given circle. Soon after identification and evaluation, protective measure should be introduced without ambiguity. Please next. And positive, defensive, and viable TCEs. If you make it, you will certainly gain something. The stakeholder, also the community, also the nation, also the user community, they will get it. Defensive depression for those items which cannot be used as commercial items, especially the rituals, the secrets and sectors, and incentive protection for those items which are endangered or which are lost, so that we can bring them into our life. And in these kind of situations, you will also come across some kind of dispute at community level, at national level, at inter-regional level, at international level. So there should be a dispute settlement at national, regional, and global level. Next, please. Here is we can say brief of our law that we have suggested for the protection of TCE of Bangladesh, which can be used for all LDCs and all the developed countries of the world. Please next. And we have next. Community museum. So how to identify, how to protect, how to preserve in a tangible and intangible form of all the TCEs of TKs. We have suggested community museum at the local level that will also work as IPR society, IPR bargaining agency, intellectual property bargaining agency, and at the same time a display center, at the same time we can say an exhibition, at the same time a tangible, physical preservation of all the items that have gone out of circulation. Please next. So, community museum in Bangladesh, in every community, indigenous or our local communities, Okay, I understand. I'm running out of time. So, even in other countries, or 2 or 3 minutes, if you can allot me. Okay. Thank you very much, madam. So, if all other countries, LDCs, they can develop community museum in the proper sense of the term, not Dhaka Museum, not National Museum. These are the museums where you will get only the evidence, artifacts of the past. But here you will get the artifact of the past at the same time and also related things. It will also work as a display center. Please next. I think I have said, please next. And invisible cultural industry is sprouting all over the world, and this is a burning question of the time now. You see, UNESCO, when I first gave this presentation, I also argued this, and a lot of people argued. In Bangladesh, look at the high footpath, you will find an invisible cultural industry is sprouting. You go anywhere in Bangladesh, you will get the folk cakes are being innovated in a new manner, traditional structural pattern to protect and to gain from it. Next, governments and international community can assist them. It means that look at the person who is holding the cross. This is a Christian cross, but he is a Garo. But so now when he is worshipping, he is worshipping like a Christian. At the same time, he is also retaining his bamboo structure of the Garo legacy. That is what we want. Government, international communities can assist the indigenous local communities, but they should not interfere at all. Next, concluding remarks. The soil and soul of the less privileged communities of LDCs must be awakened to make them self-reliant, repulsing unwanted cultural intrusion as well as assimilating the congenial one from outside. Don't repulse, but at the same time accept something. Benefits accruing from such activities could certainly enrich them, as well as the state parties and the international communities committed to human rights and cultural diversities across the world. Traditional culture widens our body and soul, promoting harmonious development of mankind. Non-LDC now, non-LDC, low income and small countries also need their TKNDCs to be preserved, promoted, assimilated with modern life. We also say even the developed countries, they are already exploring these things. That's why I have not dwelled upon them. Traditional culture, the world will truly grow in reciprocation, not in negation. Rabindranath Tagore asserts that civilization will advance in meaningful meeting, not in disrespectful rejection. Okay, Lalonsa says, Shunar Manush Bhashte Jale, Shunar Manush Bhashte Roshe, Je Jeneshe Rosho Ponti, She Dekite Pai Onayashe. He who knows the ways of Russia or enjoyment can see effortlessly. Culture is the decisive way of Russia or enjoyment that can also render us into real seers, the human beings made of gold around the world. This next.
Our next speaker is Dr. William Westerman, who's going to talk about
today, so I have taken kind of a makeshift solution. I've got a little bit of PowerPoint and some photos and folders, and I'm going to be diving back and forth when the time comes. I'd like to begin by thanking a few people, in particular Dr. Feroz Mahmood for his generous invitation and hospitality to come to this conference. It really means a great deal to me to be able to be here with you. And I would also like to thank Professor Ulo Valk for his extraordinary generosity of spirit. Those of you who don't know him, really he's a remarkable person, not just as a scholar, but as a colleague. You just don't come across people with that kind of generosity very often. So thank you. And I also would like to pay homage to two of my professors who are in the room, who served on my dissertation committee. So thank you for your guidance and leadership of emerging Bangladeshi society, transitions from village traditions to an increasingly urban existence, and the resulting impact on both traditional culture and expressive culture at the level of the everyday. Although both Margaret Mills and Henry Glassy were professors and mentors of mine, we also shared mutual mentors in our own training, mentors who represented very different, though complementary strands of the definition of our field. When Professor Mills was a PhD student, and I was a university undergraduate at the same university, we both studied under the late Albert Lord, best known for his theory of oral formulaic performance, and who might be termed a purist in terms of his definition of folklore as oral traditional literature. Henry Glassy and I shared a dissertation advisor, Dr. Don Yoder, at different stages of his career. He's now 91 years old and still writing, and his broad definition of folk life and folk political understanding. I have long since been interested in how people express their understanding of politics, how our relationships between individuals, other individuals, and social institutions, and the forms that expression takes in narrative, material culture, symbolism, and other genres in which folk protest is manifested. In listening to such expressions, social scientists can hear what is unspoken in the official story. Over the years, I attended a 9-hour Bengali poetry festival in Philadelphia the entire day. One was by a high school student, and the other was Allen Ginsberg's famous poem, September. I've attended countless musical performances from auditoriums to soccer fields to sessions attended by thousands of Bengali and Bangladeshi Americans and Canadians, with cultural programs running 18 hours a day to Malaysia and the Gulf countries, to Europe, Australia, and North America, in a range of occupations from domestic service to construction to restaurant work to engineering and medicine. Even the urban workforce within Bangladesh, such as here in Dhaka, is composed of rural migrants to the city, some of whom come permanently and put down roots. As the second largest exporter of garments in the world, the explosion in factory labor workers is a major story and part of Dhaka's huge population growth in the past decade. That impact is more positive because my sense of folklore is not one of unmitigated loss of village culture, though I am aware of irreparable loss of indigenous languages, traditional narratives, music, and crafts encouraged by the global free market and the consumer capitalist economy. Bangladeshi migration to the U.S. has been shaped by two channels of immigration. One of these is higher education and the immigration of highly skilled professionals, doctors, engineers, and so on. The other has been the U.S. diversity, or DV lottery, which many of you have probably heard of. A random drawing that awards some 50,000 green cards of permanent residence a year to people who come from countries that send, relatively speaking, fewer immigrants to the U.S. As you probably know, Bangladesh has now sent so many immigrants that 2 years ago it crossed the threshold and is now no longer eligible for this program. Nonetheless, for some 15 years, about 5,000 Bangladeshis were given green cards every year. The only qualification was that they had to have completed high school or practiced a highly skilled trade for more than 2 years. And to date, I've only met one family whose head of household fell into the latter category. So about 5,000 people a year coming over a period of 15 years. Typically, young single males would come and then would return to Bangladesh to find a wife. So we're talking about 50,000 to 75,000 people immigrating to the U.S., most of them staying in the New York City area since the early 1990s. This is a very different population and social class and skill background from the Bangladeshi communities in Europe and the Gulf countries. Although the UK has a relatively old community of Saletis who came through Commonwealth channels, that remains the exception. And speaking of exceptions, there's only one Bangladeshi taxi driver in London where the industry remains dominated by the native born. Most of the recent Bangladeshi immigrants to Europe, however, have come through irregular channels, and those in the Gulf and Malaysia as well are labor migrants from a different social class in Bangladesh. And their story is a different one, though not unrelated, which I'm also working on. Many of these come via life-threatening journeys across the Mediterranean, selling family village land to raise funds to pay smugglers, and working their way across Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey as they wend their way west. But that is a different set of stories from a different social class of migrants than we find in the United States. I've chosen to look at occupational folk life in one of the industries in the U.S. that is dominated by immigrants, and in New York, heavily populated by Bangladeshis, namely taxi driving. In almost every city in the U.S., the vast majority of the taxi driver population is foreign-born. In some cities, such as Newark, New Jersey, the largest city in the state of New Jersey, It has been documented that there are no remaining U.S.-born taxi drivers. The other thing you must know that in the U.S., every city has its own demographic mix, its own cultural fingerprint, if you will, of the nationalities of the drivers. In some cities, immigrants from Haiti predominate. In other cities, Somalis and Eritreans. In others, West Africans. In still others, Egyptians, and so on. In the largest city in America, New York, the taxi driver population is more than 50% South Asian born, with Bangladeshis the largest single group, followed by Pakistanis and Indian Sikhs from Punjab and Haryana. The remainder of the drivers are West African, Haitian, Colombian, Chinese, Egyptian, West Indian, and scattered other nations. I've been involved in a project at the Library of Congress to collect narratives of these taxi drivers and to understand more about the occupational culture of the drivers as part of a larger multi-year project on occupational folklife in the United States. Because of this conference, because of the demographics of the driver population, and because I have been working with Bangladeshi immigrants in one way or another for this time, I'll talk today about the lives and experiences of the Bangladeshi drivers. Although notable New York City folklorists, namely Ben Botkin and Steve Zeitlin, have made reference to this folk speech and narrative of taxi drivers, this is the first systematic study or collection of their occupational folklife. Two recent studies discuss the history of taxi driving in books that are both eponymously named Taxi, in fact as an occupation, one is a social history book, the other is an economic sociology of the trade. But neither of these two books named Taxi takes into account the expressive culture of the drivers, including in fact an absence of oral historical sources. Although from time to time other popular books, usually marketed as humor of all things, and documentaries will feature interviews and words of wisdom. Seminal history misses, in my mind, the golden opportunity. He keeps his slender volume within the realm of purely documentary history, eschewing both oral history and ethnography as methods to flesh out his research. The past 20 to 30 I began preliminary fieldwork on this project in connection with the idea for an exhibit at the small American Labor Museum in Helden, New Jersey, and later at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival at the turn of the millennium, which, as it turned out, was a pivotal moment in the restructuring of the taxi economy in New York. The industry remains non-unionized, and one of the pressing issues concerns cross-cultural collaboration among drivers from different national origins. As the occupation became controlled more by fleet owners rather than individual driver operators, and more recently has been dominated by garage middlemen who lease cars with absentee owners to immigrant drivers, the downward push from the top, which is to say the successful consolidation of an owner class, usually owning multiple cars, the driver jobs became filled more by immigrants, especially from South Asia, Africa, and the West Indies. Few occupations incorporate informal storytelling and conversation to the extent that driving a taxi does. Regardless of the city where the ride takes place, the taxi is a setting for a dialogue between driver and customers, a mini drama. In American culture, though, no city is more so closely associated with taxis and conversation than New York. It was these narratives and spontaneous drama that were my initial fieldwork interest. But I learned the dialogue in the cab, however, is only one aspect of the occupation that makes itself known to outsiders. Where the occupational folklore takes place is in narratives and gatherings among drivers themselves after the shift or on their breaks. I started frequenting taxi driver restaurants in New York City, easily identifiable by their 24-hour service, South Asian cuisine, usually billed as Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi cuisine, and yellow taxis parked out front in the street. One Bangladeshi restaurant in particular, Costa Rica Pavilion, was patronized exclusively by Bangladeshi drivers, while other restaurants just up the street catered to Pakistani or Punjabi Sikh customers. Drivers would come to eat and drink cha, trade stories, and play very serious chess. Much of the driver's world is a 24-hour world, and drivers carry around in their minds a conceptual atlas of where they can get emergency repairs to their cars at all hours of the day and night, and where they can use bathrooms in any given part of town. Since public urination is a legal offense in the U.S., taxi drivers are kept under tighter scrutiny than other motorists. From talking to drivers, I learned that the structure of the work is different from other industries. Both Graham Hodges and the Greek author Vasilis Vasilikos have observed that taxi drivers make up a class unto themselves, not fitting into any other. They are workers in the service economy, to be sure, who experience minimal supervision by their bosses, although this has changed dramatically during the past decade. They interact with, usually, a higher social class of customers, although at some point in New York, everyone has to take its taxi sooner or later. And yet, if they are independent drivers, they control the means of production, to a point. They also traditionally set their own hours, although that too is changing dramatically. It is this shift from the independently owned, American-born, working-class, aspiring middle-class workforce to the predominantly immigrant, fleet-owned, leased car, and more regulated class of drivers that is the socioeconomic story of the past couple decades. In some ways, it is an illustration of the process of globalization in microcosm. I'm also interested in the folklore of social hierarchies, and just as here in Bangladesh there is a hierarchy of livery service from private driver to taxi to CNG to rickshaw. There is a hierarchy of taxis in New York, including at the top limousine and corporate drivers, so-called medallion or yellow cab drivers, livery drivers who drive taxis outside the central part of the city in black cars that run without a meter, to so-called gypsy cab drivers, which are a lot of Tajiks actually, and Africans. Taxi driving is also highly gendered, and it remains one of the most male-dominated professions in the United States, with over 99% of New York City's drivers still being male. Again, I have not yet heard of any female Bangladeshi drivers, though I know of at least one and have heard rumors of a second Pakistani woman driving taxis. I expected to hear narratives of the job, and in fact I did, with the most popular motif by far being the story of the passenger who cheated the driver out of a large fare, the trickster figure. Here you go. One driver even carried the unpaid receipt in his wallet for years afterwards. The second most common topic are stories of injustice at the hands of the Taxi and Limousine Commission, a quasi-governmental agency with its own police and own courts, specifically with jurisdiction over taxis and limousines, and not subject to the same rules and standards of evidence and due process as regular courts. But among Bangladeshis, every interview, and indeed almost every informal conversation, begins with a discourse on economics from the point of view of a folk, with drivers telling you to a person about the economic structure of the job and how it works against the driver. When I first did my fieldwork 10 years ago, it was possible for a night shift driver to earn as much in 1 month as I did in my NGO job. Not so anymore. The shifts in ownership, the policy and cost of leasing cars, court and penalty costs, and the rise in the price of fuel have cut deeply into drivers' pockets.
Can you hear over the sound of that fan? Is it all right back there? It's a very noisy fan. You can still hear? Thank you.
The Bangladeshi drivers, being particularly analytical and forthcoming about their analysis, have articulated this position more than drivers from other national origins. Again, this may have something to do with their educational and class background. African and even Sikh and Pakistani drivers have come through different legal channels, so their workforce is not so highly educated on the whole as the Bangladeshi drivers. Nonetheless, Bangladeshi drivers tend to fall into two categories. Most begin driving soon after arriving in New York, long enough to be in the US to learn to drive and have basic knowledge of the city and the driving rules, and who turn to the job because they don't need fluent English, and their friends can also help train them and introduce them to the garages. Of these, some drive while they go to school to perfect their English and train for a career, and eventually move on to other professions, including engineering, corporate positions, and even one doctor whom I met, as well as a former Olympic athlete for Bangladesh who now owns an Italian restaurant.